Optic Gaming need to make a change, but it's not what you think. And today we're going to be breaking down Optic Gaming before HCS Report. We're really excited to do this show because I feel like you can't know where you're going till you know where you've been. So on this episode of HCS Weekly Report, we're going to be breaking down stats, their previous tournament placements, and what they have to do to make sure they, if not get into the top three, stay into the top three depending on where you have them. Because as of right now, the HCS is really competitive, and I'm not sure. We got Optic, SSG, FaZe, but then Sentinels are trying to sneak in. There's plenty of other teams that have it out for Optic Gaming. So let's just hop right into the stats real quick. And right from Salt Lake City, Utah, by the way, SSG threw an amazing invitational event. I was actually there casting, had the best seat in the house, and let me tell you, the venue was beautiful. You could tell there was a lot of people that put a lot of work into all of this, and I want to dive in right off the rip with some stats. 18-12, so a 60% win percentage out of the 30 games played by Optic Gaming. Honestly, isn't that bad, especially for a team that ultimately didn't win the tournament. We've seen worse for teams that end up getting fourth place, but let's dive into what we really want to talk about, which I can't lie to you, their Slayers and their capture the flags for Optic Gaming not looking the best that it can be. 6-5 in Slayer, 2-3 in capture the flag is nowhere where we want to be. And when we talk about the changes that Optic have to make, I'm not talking roster changes like a lot of the people talk about. We're gonna talk more about the roster and how crazy it is that people think they have to make a roster change in order to find success. But what we are going to talk about is the fact that they do need to turn their weaknesses into strengths, or at least strengthen them up a little bit. And it's obvious that Optic Gaming are struggling in both Slayer and capture the flag. Mind you, Oddball looking really good. Strongholds pretty decent, at least in Salt Lake City. And King of the Hill, we split the difference here at 2 apiece. Not the worst, but 5 losses in Slayer, a game type that you could potentially see twice in a best of 5. I feel like that's where you really have to have one of your strengths, and that's one of the things we are going to talk about. When we're going into maps, obviously we know Optic are an amazing live fire team. They've always been that. I will say shout out to their Solitude game, newest map added to the rotation, and clearly Optic were prepared and obviously practiced plenty on the Solitude, and obviously Streets looking good. Very similar to live fire. They've always been an amazing live fire team and a very good Streets team, and that's kind of carried over. Where we're struggling here is Aquarius, and most likely it's that capture the flag record on Aquarius, but probably a little bit of losses coming from Slayer as well for Optic Gaming. But why don't we dig more into the roster again? Been hearing people talk about they have to make a roster change. Actually been hearing people talk about APG specifically, and I want to talk about all of that. But let's start with the whole roster in general. And of course, we got to show some love to Optic. Formal 17.29 average kills, 8 assists to go along with it, a 5.67 KDA with an average of 5k damage. This is unreasonably good. Like a 5.67 KDA, which, by the way, you have a teammate in Lucid who's kind of matching that same energy, averaging 16 kills, averaging even more assists, almost 9 assists per game, and even almost a death less, and also a 5.35 KDA. That is absolutely ridiculous for Optic Gaming. It's obvious where their firepower is coming from in both Form and Lucid. Sitting right behind them is Trippy, only about 400 damage behind Lucid when it comes to average damage dealt. He's sitting at a 3.31 KDA, which is very, very good, and definitely toward the top half of some of the best lane teams in the tournament. And even APG, which a lot of people in the Twitch chat are trolling him for whatever reason, still a 1.02 KDA, only about 400 damage behind Trippy. And then on top of that, when you factor in all the objective time he's doing within the zone captures and strongholds, as far as the ball time being held as well by APG, 78 flag grabs and capture the flag, which is ridiculous, and 204 zone scores when it comes to King of the Hill. not only is APG doing most of the objective work, but he still managed to keep a positive 1.02 KDA. And on top of that, he's only a little bit of damage behind Trippy, their tertiary Slayer. The fact that people are always on his case and always trying to say they have to drop APG is crazy. And those people are just casuals, don't understand the game. Optic Gaming thrive on their defensive setups. When they get into them, they are dangerous. They are hard to break. As of right now, we need to start focusing on getting to those defensive setups faster for Optic Gaming so that they can ultimately fix their Slayers and their capture of flags. And I would even say, a little bit of the King of the Hill game and make that more on the positive side. But we know what Optic Gaming bring to the table, and we know how amazing these four players play together. But if that doesn't improve it, let's keep going. As I've said multiple times now, we want to turn Optic's weaknesses into strengths, or at least strengthen them. I think the best way to do that is to take your main rivals that have been kind of a thorn in your side, and taking their strengths and bringing it into your own weaknesses. Does one of two things. Number one, makes you stronger. Number two, it allows you to pick up habits that your opponents do, which could be really good in your future matchups against those opponents. Like, for example, FaZe, a really good slaying team. Let's find out what some of their habits are that makes them a great Slayer team. So not only add to our weaknesses and make us stronger, but then on top of that, let's also find out some weaknesses of theirs that we can exploit in our future matchups, which may just give us the edge over our opponents. I think that's the one thing that needs to change as far as Optic Gaming, again, not roster-wise. But let's talk about Optic Gaming a little bit more. We're going to talk about the last 6 tournaments, 3 of them being online, 3 of them being on LAN. So, not gonna lie to you, 2 out of the 3 major tournaments ultimately leading to the LAN season ended up being a top 6 finish for Optic Gaming. For a team that was known for being one of the most dominant teams in the HCS Online. In fact, people were accusing them of being an online-only team at one point. That is definitely not what you want to see. They did get a first-place win during one of the online tournaments, but at the end of the day, we judge Optic Gaming based on their LAN performance, really not their online performance. However, I will say, 3rd place at the Global Invitational, not bad. Want to see Optic within the top 3. Top 6 at the Arlington Major in their own backyard. Definitely not what we want to see Optic Gaming, and that was a little bit upsetting. 4th place during SLC. Honestly, I thought SLC was a really good tournament for Optic Gaming. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later on. But I will say, overall, the last 3 tournaments, not bad. Like, the fact that people are still saying blow it up, it's just crazy to me when they only got 1 top 6 finish. I think 3rd place is decent. 4th place is obviously not where you want to be, but it's definitely not blow it up status whatsoever, and it's 100% salvageable. And I'm really excited to see where Optic Gaming go when going back to Texas over at Fort. Now I want to talk about specifically some of their matchups and some of the teams that ultimately they beat, and more importantly, some of the teams that they lost to, which will really allow us to deep dive into where we want to focus our studies. Optic Gaming 3-2 over a very good G1 roster. I would say I would love to see this be a 3-1, but I'm not going to sit there and beat them over the head for losing 1 extra game. Like we talked about, that G1 roster was very good, and still is now. Obviously, it went through some crazy changes, and players went their separate ways, but I would really like that G1 roster. I will say Optic Gaming 3-0 over J-Links. Definitely where we want to be. But getting swept by Quadrant in pool play your first time back on LAN kind of reignited some of the talks that we talked about during the online qualifiers leading up to this tournament, saying that Optic Gaming didn't look like the same team that literally was fresh off of a 3-peat when it came to LAN, and after getting 3-0 swept by Quadrant, kind of brought up some of those rumblings a bit more. Eventually find out the Quadrant obviously are the real deal. We're going to get into that a little bit more, but I will say you got to be competitive, especially against Quadrant. I know stylistically it's a bad matchup for Optic. Doesn't matter. You got to take a game. You got to take 2 games, even if you lose to them. And honestly, you got to beat them, which, don't worry, they do. Either way, they still did good enough to end up out of pool play in the winner's side of the bracket. I'm going to talk about their 3-0 over Complexity, then running into Space Station Gaming and getting 3-1. Obviously, Optic had SSG's numbers for quite some time, but I will say in this latter half of 2023, SSG looked like the second best team in the world. And honestly, at SLC, they definitely look like the best team in the world. Optic, we're just trying to get them in that top 3 or keep them in that top 3 conversation. Not gonna be mad that ultimately Optic had lost to SSG, but we are going to talk about SSG a lot. Optic Gaming did eventually get the revenge on Quadrant 3-2, having to go to a Game 5. Quadrant were so resilient, but Optic Gaming did ultimately knock them out of the tournament. Same tournament, they got swept in pool play. Great for them. And then on top of that, 3-0 Native Red. I like talking about Native Red and Quadrant when it comes to playing against Optic, because I think there are hard counters to what Optic are trying to do. I think Native Red and Quadrant match up really well stylistically against Optic. So anytime you're able to beat them, it definitely feels good for Optic Gaming. It shows that you really are versatile, which is what they were known for quite some time. And eventually 3-1 again by Space Station Gaming. I'm, again, not going to beat them up too much as far as losing to Space Station Gaming, but what did we talk about before? Turning your weaknesses into strengths. And what did we talk about? Some of the weaknesses that Optic Gaming had. Capture the Flag number 1, Slayer number 2, and Aquarius. Those were our worst game types and maps at SLC, and those are some of the things that we want to really focus on. Taking good habits away from your opponent, also identify reoccurring ones, so this way we can exploit weaknesses or reoccurring habits within your opponents whenever we get into future matchups. Optic and SSG are going to match each other a lot. So going in, we got Space Station Gaming, 23-9. By the way, a team that didn't win this tournament, 23-9 with a 71.9% win percentage. Whenever we talk about teams that having some of the best win percentages overall, that are just have a wide map pool, what we mean by that is like very weak game mode and map combinations, we definitely got to talk about SSG. 23-9 in the tournament you didn't even win is crazy statistically. And mind you, they also didn't do well in Slayer. In fact, if we compare the two, as Optic's performance at SLC and Slayer 6-5 is the exact same as Space Station Gaming's performance at Dallas, yet still they only lost 9 times, 5 of them being Slayer. What they didn't lose was on Capture the Flag. Again, you had 5 opportunities, undefeated here for Space Station Gaming. Optic, 5 opportunities, 2-3. Aquarius, 4-2. Not bad whatsoever. Definitely respectable. On the other side, Aquarius, 2-3. If there's one thing I'm going to be focused on with Space Station Gaming, I'm going to focus on their Capture the Flag game and their Aquarius game, which definitely go hand in hand. I'm going to be focusing on their Capture the Flag Aquarius games when I'm focusing on SSG. Like SSG are fairly similar team to Optic, especially when you're comparing, like, you know, the other teams that are out there. Like, I don't really see Quadrant or FaZe as a comparison to Optic. I think if anything out of those 4 teams, I think the 2 that are most alike would probably be Space Station Gaming and Optic. So I think this is one team that you could really learn from, and on top of learn how to beat them on these very game types. And finding habits is able to bring them into your own weaknesses, turn them into strengths, and then on top of that, you get to find reoccurring habits, which ultimately can be weaknesses in your opponent's game if you exploit them the right way. One thing I also noticed when looking at the stats for SSG is, on top of that amazing win percentage, when you look at your kills per game, they look very similar to Optic Gaming's. Honestly, it's really not that far. On top of that, the assist, very similar, a little bit more assist on the side of SSG, but not enough to warrant the major differences when it comes to win percentage and map count. What I did notice when it came to KDA was no players in the 5.0 KDAs. You have 2 on Optic Gaming that are sitting over 5.0 KDA, which is crazy, the fact they're able to do that, and while also having 3 players in a negative damage differential. This is a lot of times where I talk about where stats can be a little bit misleading. A lot of people think that they're putting major damage on the map and they're doing great, or getting high KDAs and doing fantastic. Well, you know what? Teams like SSG, when it comes to straight KD, barely over a 1.0, yet they still win games. It's about efficiency, it's about teamwork, it's about coordination, about getting over the hump. Lots of times these stats can be a little bit misleading. If you're playing for stats, sometimes you're not playing for the win. Not to say that the Optic Gaming's problem, just wanted to put that out there. That was for you, ranked teammates. Just want to put that out there for you guys. But what's crazy to me is that SSG still find a way to win, despite having 3 players at a negative damage differential, despite not having anybody with a 5.0 KD or more, and KDA, excuse me, or more, and having very similar kills and assists to Optic Gaming. This is why I talk about that fact that Optic and SSG are a little bit closer to each other than, say, like a FaZe or a Quadrant. I think there's a lot to be learned right now from Optic, from SSG, that they can add into their own gameplay, which will make them even better. Next up, I want to talk about their run in their home tournament in Arlington. This was the Optic Major. Talk about them in pool. Much better results in pool play. I will say, in my opinion, I think this pool was a little bit easier than what they experienced before, but you had a 3-0 over 6 Karma, a 3-0 over Shopify Rebellion, and a 3-1 over Status Quo. Status Quo taking the only game off of Optic Gaming here in pool play, which is a lot cleaner than they looked over at the Dallas Invitational. Obviously coming up number 1 in their pools, they ended up in the winners bracket, and man, did they show off and show out, getting another big win against Native Red. Talked about Native Red's playstyle being a hard counter to Optics, similar to Quadrant, so any win on Native Red is going to be great, especially a 3-0 finish. However, again, SSG once again gets the best of you the 3rd time since our second life here on LAN. 3rd time, and this time it's a 3-0. I don't mind Optic Gaming losing SSG. They look like the 2nd best team in the world, and sometimes they look like the best team in the world, but you have to remain competitive. Love to see a game or 2 off of them, but I'm not going to kill them over it. What I am going to do is scroll down here, and I will get a little harsh by saying Quadrant with the 3-2 finish over Optic Gaming. We'll say, loved Quadrant. They went on a crazy run, actually with the first team outside of North America to not only finish into the top 4, but also finish in 3rd place after 3-1 Sentinels. But again, Optic, you have to get over the hump. You have to beat Quadrant. I know they're stylistically a really tough matchup for Optic Gaming, but it doesn't matter. You got to go out and do the damn thing, especially since you're top 3 entire world. Again, not going to beat them up too much. And again, I still feel like, even though I don't think Quadrant are really comparable to Optic as far as playstyle wise, still think it's worth looking into. We know about Quadrant. They are an amazing Strongholds team. In fact, they're still sporting a 16-0 Strongholds record, despite the fact that they have not won a tournament. Somehow, they still have found a game type that they never lose, which is crazy. On top of that, they're King of the Hill, also looking good, which I guess would be the most similar game type to Strongholds compared to Oddball, Capture the Flag, or Slayer. Makes sense that they would also be a great King of the Hill team. Also, not too good on Slayer, so not really going to talk about that too much. I'm not really going to say that there's really much to go off of. Besides, I would say if I'm watching Quadrant, I'm learning what they're doing on Strongholds and even King of the Hill to get over the hump against some of the best teams in the world. They've beaten the likes of FaZe, they've beaten Optic, they've beaten SSG on Strongholds, so I definitely think it's worth studying up on them and finding out what makes them such a good Strongholds team. To me, I think it's their active move. I feel like a lot of times when I'm playing Strongholds, it's very easy for me to go onto a double cap and try to find like a bend but don't break strategy, find the corner to hide it over towards B, have a couple players watching A or C, whichever one you have, and dare the enemy team to push up and catch it by surprise and get some easy kills. With Quadrant, I feel like they're always doing multiple things at the same time. Players are moving, shuffling feet. They're always prepared to out-rotate. Their decision-making is absolutely amazing. If they feel like they can't headbutt you, they will out-rotate you. If they feel like they can't out-rotate you, they will headbutt you. I feel like their Strongholds decision-making and timing is always really good. That's one of the things that I think that makes Quadrant amazing in Strongholds. Again, I would say Optic, go ahead and study up, find out, because man, if you can become as as good of a Strongholds team as them and consistently beat out SSG and FaZe in that game type, that could be amazing for Optic. Finally, we have to talk about Salt Lake City, our very last land before heading over towards Fort Worth, where you 3-0 Navi, 3-0 Shopify Rebellion, and then you lost to a Game 5 to Sentinels, are still a fairly new team. I'm not going to beat you up off of that. Sentinels, I always do the Sentinels will be really, really good, but I feel like I've always overhyped teams, so I tried to keep my expectations tempered a little bit when it came to Sentinels, and man, did they knock down every single barrier. Their run at Arlington was incredible. Their run here at SLC was even better. I would love to see Optic win this as far as for this, I guess, video-wise, but at Sentinels, they were on one. Still a good enough performance here made by Optic Gaming to end up in the winner's bracket where you did 3-1 Quadrant. Any win over Quadrant is an amazing win, especially 3-1, especially after the last time they knocked you out of the tournament. I think Optic really needed this win, and in fact, I would say even argue to say that momentum propelled them to taking Space Station Gaming all the way down to a Game 5, where at times it looked like Optic Gaming may have come out with the win and ended up in the winner's bracket finals, beating out SSG finally in the second half of the season. I will say eventually SSG did come out with the win, but man, really impressed with what Optic did here in the winner's bracket. Let's see if we feel the same down in the lower. Another win by Optic Gaming against a team that stylistically has an advantage over them, or at least gives them a little bit of troubles, in Native Red. 3-2. Native Red still able to take you over to a Game 5, but you come out on top where you take FaZe to a Game 5. Still, FaZe come out and beat you, who were actually trying to pull off a three-peat in themselves were FaZe, and man, would that have been impressive. Finally, FaZe end up in the lower bracket a little bit earlier than expected, and in that lower bracket, they run into Optic Gaming, but still, I would say, 3-1 over Quadrant, taking SSG to a Game 5, beating out Native Red, and even taking FaZe to a Game 5. I think this was really good for Optic Gaming, and I feel like they've gotten so much better and really just might be ready to put themselves in that championship form, that championship conversation again. But let's talk about FaZe. Again, we want to take habits from your opponents, find out what they are, add them to your weaknesses so you can either turn them into strengths or at least strengthen them. And on top of that, you're able to find out recurring habits within your opponent to exploit weaknesses. Say that over and over again because I think that's what Optic needs to do. I think that's the change of mentality they need to do. I feel like when they were streaming scrims, a lot of people got free information on them. Now it's time for them to get information on their opponents. We know that FaZe are one of the best lane teams in the league. Nobody's going to come out with under a 1.0 KD. It's not going to happen. But I will say, once again, we see a very strong Slaying team. And we see not a single player over that 5.0 KDA, where Optic again had 2 players over it. Crazy to think about, but still 4.89 Raw 2 damn close to it, and a lot of players very close and flirting around with that 4.0 KDA. You have 2 players that are semi with a high damage differential per match as far as average wise, and this was overall just a really good tournament for FaZe. I will say win percentage wise, nowhere near like say, you know, SSG with a 71.9% win percentage, but still respectable. And as we all know, FaZe are a great Slayer team, 7-2, that's their bread and butter, but they're also a very good capture the flag team. Where was Optic's weaknesses? Capture the flag. If you can somehow study SSG and Optic and find out what makes them tick within that game type and strengthen yours, this can be huge. I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record. Another map where a weakness of Optics where it's really a strength for FaZe is Aquarius. Undefeated, 5-0, and mind you, in a tournament that you did not win, you somehow still win 5-0 on Aquarius. What did we talk about before? That being one of Optic's weaker maps when it came to SLC. Again, you have an opportunity to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by simply studying up on FaZe's capture the flag Aquarius game type. If you can find out what SSG and what FaZe are doing on that map and game mode combination, find similarities or even differences that make them successful and implement it into your game while also figuring out how to beat your opponent, Optic Gaming can be in championship form once again. You don't have to make a roster change. I feel like the change that's to be made is studying up on your opponents and strengthening your weaknesses while also finding weaknesses on your opponent. I'm finally going to stop saying that. Guys, this is your HCS Weekly Report. Just broke down Optic Gaming before HCS Fort Worth. I'll see you again on the next one. Peace out.